He doesn't minister to the Roman sinners. Anyway, what we're seeing now is everywhere, even in with Mango Wadi, which is probably the closest one to us, but because of their international focus, we're more interested in them than, even though we've only been with Mango Wadi for a year, and we've been in the other one for 3 years. We clicked right away with Mango Wadi's group because they're missional and they're international, and so we've been doing that. But this last trip to Virginia, up to Coeur d'Alene, we spent 3 days with Dran, and Dran's the money behind all this group. Her and her husband provide all of the sports gear in Costco and some other big companies. So that's why she's around a lot. But they decided that they needed to promote some kind of form of school, and so they got to talking about classical education, and we were with Dran like for 3 days, so we were able to talk it through with her. I said, just said to her, Roman Greek education did not save Europe and hasn't yet. We don't forget that. We were having Jim Wilson, who is the father of Doug Wilson and Evan Wilson. Jim was a Korean vet and then a Korean captain, naval captain, then later became a chaplain, which is where a lot of these chaplains come up through the ranks. And he started the ministry, he started the 5 churches in the Moscow-Pullman area, and at that time it was pastored by Doug Wilson, and Evan Wilson had a church. Jim had an international church. It was all Koreans and Chinese people, and a man named Doug Busby had another church there in that. They started together, those 5 churches had a bookstore and a school called Logos, and they just started a classic education. They also had a Ransom Publishing, which they published classical education material and curriculum for the whole world. I mean, they've gotten big. But Doug Busby and Evan Wilson were more disciples of Jim, the dad. Jim's gone home, I'm sure. The other guys are still there. And when I talked to Matt, last week. Matt is saying that Evan is still there, but he's my age or a few years older than me. So the students come to his house. He said that people go there all the time and visit with him. But Evan and Doug don't talk together. Because Doug Busby and Evan were kind of stayed in the line with their father, Jim, and Doug Wilson promotes the classical education and the Logos. When we were in competition, we beat them, though, didn't we, Gene? That was cool. So, academically. So, but one of the things they were challenging us is, one thing, it was good to be there because most of the pastors there are courageous and willing to stand out and for their faith and for what they believe in their country and that. And the guys, you could tell the ones that weren't used to that because you could see it on their face. They were hearing stuff they'd never heard before and really being challenged. And one of the speakers is reigniting the Black Robe Regiment, which were during the Revolution, were pastors that were preaching from the pulpit and standing up against the British government. Yeah, thank you. So And a lot of them had either been in the military or were trained in the military, and they had their rifles lined up in the back of the room, their muskets, and the pastors would, after the day on Concord, you know, the march on Concord, they stood in their congregations and they asked for volunteers, and they all got up, and people prayed for them, and they got up, got their muskets, and they marched out to follow Washington. And that was the Black Robe Regiment, and we need to be active. And now, there's some reasons why we've become passive, and it's theology that's being taught in the evangelical church in the West, which we address it here all the time. We don't really put it in the context of government and civics and that, but we're still, you know, there's a bunch of things that affect the way we think about politics, and one is the separation of church and state, which you understand that's from the Russian the Russian Constitution, USSR, which isn't in existence now, but it was part of their constitution or documents, whatever. It said separation of church and state is in that. What they're talking about is what we have. What Jefferson said in his letter to the Danbury Baptists is not what we have. Because we don't have separation of church and state. You understand that. There's nobody in this country believes in separation of church and state but the Christians. The government doesn't believe in separation of church and state because they've created one. And you're treated as a heretic and somebody to be burned at the stake if you don't agree with their church, right? They basically have a church of secular humanism, and it has all the trappings of a church. It has the training program, it has the priesthood, it has sacraments, it has a cosmology, it has a soteriology, it has everything. And it got so, and now they have forced you know, tithes and offerings. Everybody contributes to the American church, which the American civil church is the schools. No question in my mind, or anybody else that's really taken the time to think about it, that they are a church, okay? And they're a forced church with forced offerings. They teach everything that we teach. Not the same direction, doesn't have the same goals, but it is exactly like a church. And and it's as one of the state educators, her name is also Diane, she was the director, she was the Secretary of Education in the state of Arizona, and she worked her way up through the ranks trying to make reform and bring change to the Arizona public schools. And after being at the head of the Arizona, she realized, she came to the conclusion that, and this is her statement, I've heard her say it many times on the Zoom meetings, is the public schools are not broken and you cannot fix them. Now, what does she mean by that?
They're doing what they want them to do.
Exactly. That's exactly right, Nancy. They are doing what they want to do. And they're not even being unsuccessful. They're being very successful. Because the people who designed the public school, and you can go into the history, Diane's got a whole load of books on the public school. You can look at the founders of the public school. They all signed the Humanist Manifesto 1, and the later ones, working from Columbia University and some other big universities, signed the Humanist Manifesto 2. Now, the Humanist Manifesto is a religion. By their own words, their own admission, they are a religion. So I decided we need a more advanced. One of the things that really hit me, and it's because of different things in our theology in Western evangelicalism, the passivism. And the passivism comes out of our eschatology and our soteriology. And I'm not going to get into that because I don't want to do that today. But because of those things, and Vishal is aggressive at it. Because he sees it better than we do because he's not from here. He's not a Western Christian. He's an Indian Christian, and he doesn't think like we do. And so he's always aggressively addressing those things. And the people around him do. And so it's kind of fun to be with those guys. One of the things that we need to stop thinking of future things, and we're hoping these things will happen, or that they are just people talking about it. It's not really happening. One black African pastor from Texas, or Texas pastor that has some heritage from Africa, whatever you want to call him. And he was a great guy. I spent some time with him. He's my age and has been doing this for a long, long time. And back in Jimmy Falwell's day, and the moral majority in that, which is a long time ago. And but he spoke, and the first thing he said was, "This is not coming; it's already here." We're not trying to save. We're not trying to say this is not a Save America conference, because you've already lost it. The church has already lost the country. We've lost the schools. We've lost the children. We've lost things. And what we're in now is a salvage operation. We're trying to figure out how we can go back to it, if we can. But part of and the separation of church and state is one thing. The other one is eschatology. Eschatology, in like 90% of Christians, we're just going to blow out of here. When it gets too bad, or almost as bad it is other places in the world, then we'll all just leave. At least those in the West. And you can already tell what I think of that. So what we do is we don't do anything. We become passive. And I was surprised. And I didn't really know this, that less than half of Christians, all Christians in America, even bother to vote because of that. And you realize if we're 30%, we could be anywhere from 30 to 70% of the population. So if we want something bad enough, we can get it, but we don't. And that's where we're at. So I wanted to take a more active role today. That is my sermon. But I want, if you don't understand what's going on, I'm going to have Gene come up and we're going to talk about it. We're going to take questions. He's going to go over voter information for you, because I don't want our church to be voting at 50%. We need to have everybody vote. And we'll talk about, you say, well, I don't know what to vote. Well, that's why I brought Gene in today, because we're going to talk about that. And if you have questions, you can ask me, but I'll just turn over Gene anyway, so you can ask them to Gene, okay? But I saw something here that I really liked, and this shows you where we were at one time. My country, 'tis of thee. Our Father God, to thee, author of liberty. So one of the things, you cannot have a secular state of the republic. And if you read the authors of the republic, they say this over and over again. Even the French philosopher that traveled in America back then, and wrote about it, he said, America's strength is in its churches and its people. It's not in the government. It's in the people. And that's why it's called a government by the people, for the people, anyway. But one of the things, realizing we are so used to that, we're not really. Sadika asked me the other day when I was in Cincinnati, she said, Pastor Randy, do you believe in global warming? And I said, well, let's back up. I explained it to her, but one of the things I explained, what is global warming? Global warming has nothing to do with climate. Global warming has everything to do with setting up a system of transferring wealth from people who have wealth to people who do not have wealth, and setting up a nobility, an upper class of managers who knows who the wealth are and who the poor are and who to distribute. That's called communism or Marxism. And global warming is pure Marxism. Has nothing to do with, anyway, so I was explaining this to her and I went through this whole thing. I said the world, in the history of this world, has never, some changes in, some possibilities in Greece and in Holland and Amsterdam, had a middle class. Okay, we had nobles, we had the wealthy, the extreme wealthy, and we had serfs and slaves. That's the history of the planet, the whole planet. Anywhere you go, anytime, pick a time, that's what you're going to find. You're going to find kings and tyrants, and you're going to find serfs and slaves. Now, how do you get a middle class? You have to have a middle class, you have to have liberty, and you have to have property ownership. Okay? You have to have those two things to get a middle class. What are we seeing? Nothing more than a revival of the Middle Ages, a revival of the nobility and the serfs and slaves. Guess where we are? We're serfs and slaves. That's what they want. And if you haven't figured that out, let me tell you, I want to read this line to you. This is 695. My country, 'tis of thee, 695, verse 2. My native country thee, land of the noble free. And we sing that, and I've never noticed that before until today. I saw that. Land of the noble free. And you cannot have a monarchy with the middle class. It just doesn't exist. And so for the first time in the history of the world, we created a government with a middle class. Okay, that's us. Now, what is the current administration doing with their stolen government? They are trying to recreate, and they even use these terms. They talk about their nobility, and they talk about us as, they use terms, of degraded serfs and slaves. So I was explaining that to Sadaka, and we went through that afternoon we went through the Ark, which was fascinating to me, and they had a big display on global warming, so that was cool. So she got to walk through that and see that. Okay, so we got a good half an hour so we can talk about the election. Gene, come on up here. You can use the mic if you want, but okay.
So anyway, part of the problem that we have good news and we have bad news. We still have free elections, but most of the elections in Idaho, the decisions were made back in May. You see in Idaho,